Hello, welcome to Refugee Tales. This is our second event today. Second event of this weekend, of this coming weekend. My name's Raymond Antrobus. I'm a poet, and this year I was meant to be hosting a Refugee Tales this event live. Unfortunately, that hasn't been able to happen because of everything going on with the pandemic. So I've been invited to do this digitally from my home here in Hackney in East London. The weather is pretty overcast today. So just thinking about people that have been on their walks and taking pictures of bridges and reflections that have been coming in. We're grateful for them. Kind of crazy that the pubs have reopened today. So if you have been out to a pub today, I hope you've been safe. I hope you've been keeping well. Yeah, I just thought I would just share with you some of the key messages about Refugee Tales. So for those that don't know, Refugee Tales is growing out of the work of Gatwick Detainees Welfare Group. The Gatwick Detainees Welfare Group visitors offer hope, support, unconditional acceptance, and welcome to those in indefinite immigration detention. The UK is the only country in Europe that detains people indefinitely for immigrant purposes for days, weeks, months, and years. We know 9 years after the longest period someone was detained. 9 years. Wow. Over half of people detained are later released into the UK after unnecessary family separation. 24,000 people a year are detained in immigration removal centres around the UK. 24,000. Detention is expensive and a waste of human life. Refugee Tales calls for a future without immigration detention. So for 3 days, people are walking alone or in socially distant small groups according to government guidance and coming together to attend online events like this one. We'll be hearing from our patron, the great Ali Smith, and a film by Sarah Wood. We have the voices of people with lived experience of detention and much more. Thanks to everyone who is walking and sending in photos of bridges and reflections from their walk. Thinking about why I'm here, why I've agreed to do this. I think as a writer, there was so many writers that I admire who've been involved, from Ali Smith to John Berger, and this idea of, you know, the reason why we write, and we write hoping that, you know, our books, our poems, our essays, our novels, anything, they go out into the world and they work good. They connect us, they bring us together. And I just see this kind of work as an extension of that. Myself, I did some work for English Pen, a charity organization that works with a lot of refugees and asylum seekers from around the world and within the UK. And I spent 3 months visiting a school in London and working with young refugees and getting them to write about their stories and their experiences. And for many of them, English was a third or fourth, fifth, second, third language. And I remember being at English Pen and getting each of these students to share their stories, to share their experiences, what they've gone through, and the kind of impact that this had in their lives in terms of just being heard. There was a very different kind of perspective that I found a lot of the young poets had about themselves, and they felt empowered with how much they learned about others and were able to share that. So I know the power and meaningfulness that this work has. So it's great to be here. Also, I guess thinking about detention centers, but particularly immigration. When I travel, I have spent a lot of time in the back rooms of kind of temporary holdings in airports, just solely based on my look I do have a British passport, but I'm often ridiculed and questioned and taken into back rooms and interrogated. So I've had all of these kind of quite surreal experiences. At the moment, I'm going through a case. My wife is from America. We separated because of, not just because of COVID, but also that she can't come into the country. We haven't seen each other since February, actually. So we're in the middle of this quite tedious and complicated court case where it's a lot to even explain. So, you know, I'm right now, as we speak, in the middle of this kind of weird feeling of kind of sustained distance, and in its own way, a kind of detention from my wife. And so being here and being able to connect and share with these stories, I'm actually hoping will provide me with some comfort, as well as others who are separated from the people they love and their families, for no other reason than laws. So what I thought I would do is introduce our first event, and it's a talk with Behrouz Boochani and Omid Tofighian.
Hi, my name is Omid Tofighian, and I'm the translator of Behrouz Boochani's book, No Friend But the Mountains, Writing from Manus Prison. There are a number of really important themes and issues that I want to explain in relation to Behrouz's book, and I think the best way to explain these important topics, these important issues, is by introducing certain passages and showing how these particular concepts and theories and critiques are represented through narrative, through storytelling. The first point, the first issue is the notion of systematic torture. Now, right throughout the translation process, Behrouz would be really concerned about how I was translating the book, what I was focusing on, what was being conveyed, how the book would be interpreted by different audiences. And his major worry was that the notion of systematic torture wasn't being communicated. And so that was at the forefront of my thinking when I was translating the book. So this particular passage not only conveys a deep sense of the idea of the notion of systematic torture, but it also introduces the concept that he uses in his book, that he describes in his book, which is the chieriacal system. Now, the chieriacal system is a system of interlocking systems of oppression, domination, that are all working together to for the goal of subjugation, to drive people, to grind people down into submission. So these different systems of oppression, these different systems of domination, not only are they aimed at forcing people to give up and go back to where they come from or perish, but they're also working together so that they can multiply. So replication is an important issue here. So this particular passage is the first time that Behrouz introduces the idea of the chieriacal system in the book. And I think it conveys it very well. Now, I should mention that the notion of chieriarchy, the concept of chieriarchy, was introduced by a radical feminist theologian, Elizabeth Schussler-Fiorenza, and she coined this term in the 90s to talk about exactly the same kind of thing. And I thought it was a perfect translation for a term, for an idea, for a whole philosophy that Behrouz was using in Farsi or in Persian. So the term that he was using in Farsi or Persian is Sistem-i Hakem, and it's a completely new term, and I thought the best thing to do is, in English, is to create a new term. So I used the kyriarchy and developed the idea or the phrase, the kyriarchal system. So a new term in Farsi or Persian, it was translated into a new term that we created in English, the kyriarchal system. And we describe that in detail in some other work that we've done, and also in my translator's note and my supplementary essay in the book. I go into detail about the significance and different levels of meaning of this particular concept. This is from chapter 6 of Behrouz's book, No Friend But the Mountains. I should mention before I begin that the book weaves in and out from prose to poetry. So when I arrive at a poetic part of the book, where the book transitions from prose to poetry, I'm going to put my hand up to my chest so you know that there is this shift taking place, because I think it's really significant that this move between prose and poetry is represented in some way, even when listening. The developments over the months slowly but surely prove to everyone that the principle of the kyriarchal system governing the prison is to turn the prisoners against each other and to ingrain even deeper hatred between people. Prison maintains its power over time, the power to keep people in line. Fenced enclosures dominate and can pacify even the most violent person. Those imprisoned on Manus are themselves sacrificial subjects of violence. We are a bunch of ordinary humans, locked up simply for seeking refuge. In this context, the prison's greatest achievement might be the manipulation of feelings of hatred between one another. Over time, the incidents that occur in Manus prison prove to everyone that a prisoner is a being with no solace other than brotherhood, to confide one's pain. The more time that passes in the prison, the deeper this feeling becomes. It is a pillar of the prison. Here, people are subject to more intense scrutiny. A prisoner notices the tiniest change like a blind mouse that has only its sense of smell. We are 400 people, 400 lost souls in a tightly confined space, 400 prisoners, anticipating the nights, so we can leave and enter our nightmares. We are bats in a dark cave that react to the slightest vibrations. Every day we repeat, overcome with fatigue. An aimless walk of approximately 100 meters. It seems that they are forcing us to traverse the length of a putrid, foul-smelling pool by repeating only one impractical and futile swimming stroke. Hopeless visions, worse than monsoon winds, blow away our dreams in the nights, and everything becomes tainted by bitter nightmares. In addition to the torment produced by the oppressive enclosure of the prison fences, every prisoner creates a small emotional jail within themselves, something that occurs at the apex of hopelessness and disenfranchisement. Most prisoners evaluate their health and vitality through regular close examination of their bodies, developing fragmented and disrupted identities and a warped sense of self that makes them cynical of everyone else. This is the objective of the prison's kyriarchal system, to drive prisoners to extreme distrust so that they become lonelier and more isolated, until the prison's kyriarchal logic triumphs with their collapse and demise. The next passage is also important because of the way that it describes the kyriarchal system at work and the notion of systematic torture. But here it also represents something about the colonial logic, the oppressive, the dominating, and the historical elements that are associated with the way the prison is being run. First of all, why it was created, and now how it's being run, and then how it infuses so many other aspects of people's lives. And again, when I put my hand to my chest, I'm transitioning to poetry for that short time. A twisted system governs the prison, a deranged logic that confines the mind of the prisoner, an extremely oppressive form of governance that the prisoner internalizes, a system that leaves the prisoner simply trying to cope, trying to understand the conditions of micro-control and macro-control, trying to understand the perpetual flux of everything, trying to avoid tipping over the edge, trying to avoid tipping into insanity. Every prisoner is convinced that they or their group are the critical theorists of the systemic foundation, the chief analysts of the system's architecture. But the greatest difficulty is that no one can be held accountable. No one can be forced up against the wall and questioned. No one can be interrogated by asking them, "You bastard, what is the philosophy behind these rules and regulations? Why, according to what logic, did you create these rules and regulations? Who are you?" No person who is a part of the system can ever provide an answer, neither the officers nor the employees working in the prison. All they can say is, "I'm sorry, I'm just following orders." In reality, those who are apparently part of the system also have no idea what is going on. They just enter the prison for 2 weeks, doggedly carry out the rules and regulations, then leave the island. The system can be summed up in one way. First, a condition of dependency is established. Then that dependency is framed in the context of micro-control and macro-control governmentality. Even though the interconnections vary, eating is a necessity and prisoners have no choice but to hustle to meet this basic need. And this is the point. That is the tactic used to keep them in captivity, like being caught in a spider's web. The harder you struggle, the more entangled you become. Starvation has two objectives: to implement a variety of control mechanisms on the minds of the prisoners, and to make the prisoners enmeshed and complicit in the system. The prisoner's stomach leads him to know the system, and after reacting with resistance and going through draining, drawn-out phases of action in solidarity with others, nothing. It leads nowhere. Nothing. No answers to his futile questions. Nowhere. Nowhere except the threshold of insanity. The last passage I'm going to read is a very good representation of the idea of horrific surrealism. So Behrouz combines his analysis and his depiction of the reality in the prison in very horrific ways, using horrific horror tropes and styles and techniques. But he also combines that with surrealism. And again, we've discussed this in different articles that we've written, and also in the translator's note and in the essay, the essay accompanying the book. But here I think is a very good representation of how this takes place, how this horrific surrealism is used to draw people into the prison and help people to see what's happening there and what the prisoners are enduring. I have fallen in love a few times. Love, possibly the most unresolved issue of my life. The love between two people, resonating with the harmony of the most ancient chants, surging like the refreshing water of mineral springs, exhilarating like visions stimulated by the omnipresence of the bluest skies. Encounters with love, encounters numbering a few, each time a special someone, each time a special encounter. In love to the point of death, in love to the point of tears, in love to the point when the stomach dissents and refuses to digest. One particular form of attraction, one particular ecology of allure, one particular strategy of escape, the richest truths bundled together by two people. Love, like that felt for an Ashayer girl, the crown of her clan. Love, a longing for an Ashayer girl, a longing for the majestic maiden of her kinfolk. Love, the desire for an Ashayer girl on seasonal nomadic migration. Love for an Ashayer girl atop a mare with scarlet mane. love for an Ashayer girl, transmigrating on a mare in raptures. I fell in love up on a hill where I was entranced by the fragrance of prickly artichokes. I fell in love on a spring day. I fell in love together with the scent of chamomile flowers. I fell in love as I sat on a throne made of stone from the mountains. I fell in love as I drowned in my hopes and dreams. I fell in love as I sank into the anxieties of youth. I fell in love as I directed my gaze towards the horizon. I fell in love as the horizon carried away the dignified glories of the migrating tribe, the tribe that was also carrying away their daughter. I fell in love as the tribe drifted past, wayfarers travelling through, as I remained there in the midst of a village tucked away within forests of chestnuts. I fell in love as they journeyed away, slowly, step by step, towards a lost destination. I think this last passage is important because it shows how Behrouz, throughout all of the systematic torture that he was enduring, he maintained hope. This particular passage, in different ways throughout the book, passages like this show how hope, celebration, pride, joy are used as political acts, are used in political ways, and are used as forms of resistance. This book essentially is literature as resistance.
Hello everyone, thank you very much for having me. I'm glad that I speak with you from New Zealand. I think first of all I should explain something about the exile policy of refugees, because I think it is impossible to understand this policy and understand my works and other works about refugees in Australia without having this basic information. I came to Australia on May 2013 and I arrived on 28 August 2013 in Manus Island. Actually, they exiled me with alongside 900 men. So they exiled us to Manus Island, which is an island in north of Papua New Guinea in middle of the Pacific Ocean, a very remote place. So they kept us there for 6 years, and after 6 years they closed the camp, and I ended up in New Zealand. But still 100 of the men remain in Port Moresby. So I will tell you the history of this prison camp. And also they exiled 1,500 people to Nauru Island. So they say that anyone who come to Australia by boat, we exile it to Manus Island and Nauru Island, and they call this policy and those places offshore processing center, which is a wrong word, because when they say offshore processing center, it means that they should process people, and when they find out someone is a refugee, they should find a place, they should accept it or send it to third country. But that didn't happen in Manus and Nauru for a long time. So in fact we were hostages in that island, and so what I did in that island, actually as a writer and as a journalist, so having a phone was illegal, so I tried to I smuggled a phone in and I started to communicate to the world. But for 2 years, more than 2 years, I didn't feel safe with the authorities because it was very dangerous. So I was very unknown person on that time, so it was very risky that I published my work under my real name. So what I did, I started to work and I created a network, like the human rights defenders, the organizations, and the journalists, and media, and lots of people. And after 2 years, I started to. So for the first time, I published my first article under my real name. And because on that time I felt safe, it was not. It was difficult for the government to do something wrong on me. So in that island, for 3 years, we didn't have access to phone. And after 3 years, the court, Supreme Court in Papua New Guinea, ordered that we should be free and to have access to phone. So we were hostages in that island. And before I published my book, No Friend But the Mountains, I published 100 articles mostly in Guardian Australia and other papers. So each week or each 2 weeks I published an article, and I did lots of interviews to raise this issue. And after that, on 2017, I worked with Iranian director, and we on a play. So this play was very important. So that took 6 months of my time. And after that, I made the movie Choka Plista Last Time with the Dutch director. So I did that through my phone. So it is a movie with 90 minutes. And after that, I published a book, No Friend But the Mountains. In fact, No Friend But the Mountain was the last last attempt to challenge this system. And why did I write this book? Why did I write this book with literature language? I think because I became very disappointed with the Australian society, and I became very disappointed that it is impossible to change this policy because the journalism language is not capable that we challenge this system. Although my journalism and the language that I created was different with other journalists. I tried that my language be free, and I tried to create my words and my concept, and I don't use the words and the language that created by the government. For example, I called this policy exile policy, or I used modern slavery, I used systematic torture, I used prison, because they call it camp or offshore processing center, and lots of words. And I included the indigenous people in Manus Island in my works because I believe that they were victim under this policy too. So I mean that I tried a lot to challenge the system, but finally I relied on literature language, because literature language is capable and it's strong enough that we challenge the system. And finally, that happened, and really we challenged the system. So if we look at the whole picture, the whole narrative is that the power structure in Australia, the government in Australia, and the media in Australia, they created a very negative picture of the refugees, particularly the refugees in Manus Island and Nauru. And they put us alongside, actually they define us alongside these words, terrorist, rapist, dangerous, criminal, this kind of words. And after 6 years, if we look at the whole narrative, is we challenge the system through art, through creation. We challenge them. So the negative side is Australian government, not the refugees, because we resisted in front of them through art and writing. And when I say we, because I was not the only person who write. Of course, lots of the refugees in that island. So I created this way for them to, that they speak out, they publish, they write. So lots of refugees created, later when the situation became better in some ways, they created songs and music and cartoon. Some people paint, some people write, and so I mean that the whole picture is that we challenge them. We challenge them in a high level, and that's why in my acceptance speech I said that literature is a free language, and literature is a language that we are able to challenge the system. And that is the power of language, that is the power of literature. So you can find my works on internet, you can do research about it, and there are lots of documents, information, articles and artworks, not only by me, by many refugees. And another thing I would like to mention, that right now I'm working with some other refugees. I'm working, I and Omid, Tofighian, with Janet Galbraith. We are working on a journal, and we are going to publish the literature works by the refugees. I received lots of information from the refugees around the world, in Turkey, in Greece, in Europe, in Indonesia, that they are actually going to write. They want to write their stories. They want to tell their stories. And I think that is very important, because creating in indefinite detention or in that circumstances actually help you to survive, the first thing. So always I say that I survived through my works. Of course, in other side, politically and historically is important, but in other sides help me to survive, and I survived through my works. And that's why I say that writing is resistance. Writing is resistance. So that's why I think it's very important that we, the refugees around the world, speak out and write their works and create. And that's why right now I'm working with some academics, some researchers with universities in Australia and some people in Europe. So we are using these materials, this material that I and others created in Manus Island in Nauru, to actually take this narrative into the academic works and to produce new projects, produce new works. And that is the duty of the academics, the duty of the universities. Although I think, unfortunately, the universities are very lazy and they are not creative like the artists and the writers. But we cannot change that. Just we, as an artist, just we should create works. And now that I look at the past, I can see that there is a huge body of works which is important historically, although history is not important for the refugees. And when we say historically, it means that we are disappointed with the current generation. It means that this current generation is not going to create change, and that is very disappointed. But what can we do to create change? We should create our work. And another thing, the last point I would like to mention is that all of these works, including this book, are unofficial part of history, part of the history that the power structure never want to recognize. And this unofficial history is actually the minority history. So it's not only about refugees. In Australia, we can see that they didn't recognize the indigenous community and the political movement and cultural movement in Australia, and they try to push it back and don't recognize it and don't accept it as a part of the official history. And these works, I think, are alternative works. Yeah, thank you very much for having me today, and I hope that to create change, we just continue to work and work on basis of a language that we created, not the power structures. Yeah, thank you very much.
Wow, I really enjoyed that. It was powerful. Thank you, Behrouz. Thank you, Omid. I really like what Omid said about literature of resistance, and then what Behrouz followed up with, literature as a free language. And it made me think so much about, not just Behrouz's perseverance. His journey is really quite something. But this idea of, how we use art, how we use creativity to bring about change, how within creativity, within embodying our creative spirit, we create a different kind of system. And there's there's a Blake scholar called Kathleen Rain who talks about how when you say a word, when you speak a spoken word, there's an energy to it, right? You know the energy of a spoken word, but when you write a word down, the word becomes a seed. You're planting something. Every word has a history, has an etymology, and that kind of is rooted in something. So this idea that Behrouz wrote this book and he found a kind of freedom in it, in applying it to literature, to capital L literature, to making it part of a landscape of landscape of the history of literature and language and how it's moved through. Wow, yeah, really really inspiring. And also it made me think about some things I learned about Refugee Tales, which has been going for 25 years. They have 75 volunteers, and every event that they do, they produce a book, and that book is then used as a tool to speak with parliamentarians. And I've done youth work like this as well, with young people who are in youth detention centers and stuff like that, get to work with me, work with other poets, and then they get to share their work in Parliament, where they're actually in front of policymakers, and those policymakers then hopefully are impacted in a way that when they're passing through laws, they're remembering stories like Behrouz's, or like any of the students who've gone through their struggles and their poverties and their injustices. So this is a really pragmatic thing. I don't think it's a kind of airy fairy ideology. It's pragmatic, it's real, it's creative, it's important, it's soulful. So I feel inspired and rejuvenated through that in this time. So I think we're going to move on. And this time we're going to get some music from Greg Russell and Ciaran Algar.
Hello, we are Greg Russell and Ciaran Algar, and we are back for our third year with the amazing people of Refugee Tales. And we took part for the first time 2 years ago in a village hall, a church hall in North London, if memory serves. And then last year we were, of course, we were in that lovely theatre cum cinema down in St Leonard's near Hastings. And we were meant to be live again this year, but obviously circumstances as they are, we are now coming to you from, I'm in Sheffield and Ciaran Algar is in Manchester. How are you, Ciaran Algar?
Yeah, I'm good.
You okay?
Yep.
Good stuff. So we're just going to play a few songs. We're going to play you some Refugee Tales favourites. We've got 2 requests and we've only got time really for a third, so we'll play something to get you dancing at the end as well. Dancing has always been a rather remarkable part of our performances at Refugee Tales, but before we get there, we'll sing you a couple. And this is a song called The Silent Majority. There's a moral to the story that I'm about to tell. Take a look around you and you see that all is well. And just because you're cozy, don't think the world is rosy. Some people in this world are going through hell, and the silent majority stays silent as the despots murder millions worldwide. Tyrannical purveyors of injustice, they make the laws say the laws are on their side. In 33 in Germany, when Hitler came to play, liberty was gradually eroded day by day as they gassed and shot dissenters. Well, the decent people cowered for the things they never dared to say, and the silent majority stayed silent as they rounded up the Democrat and Jew. For the fatherland they murdered children's fathers, whose only crime was saying what was true. In 73 in Chile, workers marched to show their plight, but a fascist few with guns and mortars showed them how to fight. In Santiago Stadium, they tortured and killed, they smashed the opposition out of sight. And the silent majority stayed silent as democracy was crushed beneath their tank. They were murdered in the name of Western freedoms, with the aid of planes donated by the Yanks. Students, workers, wives and children, hope was in the air as they stood in peaceful protest. They were massacred and armed, they annihilated thousands were there. And the silent majority stayed silent as they executed dozens in their name. And the people's army turned upon the people, and corruption reigned supremely once again. South Africa, Cambodia, Great Britain, Iran, every nation state in history since history began. So the Son of Man was murdered to pay the price of sin. I sometimes think your Saviour died in vain. And the silent majority stayed silent as they crucified the Lamb upon the hill. They are murdered in the name of Western freedoms, and if Christ returns, you'll crucify him still. To twist the facts before our very eyes. In the threads of truth they weave their evil, wicked lies. Like Jesus was a heretic, Caesar was a god, pity helped the men who criticized. If the silent majority stayed silent, then the evil men will surely have their way. Stem the tide before the deluge, that's the moral. If we don't speak up, we'll all get swept away. And if the silent majority stays silent, if the silent majority stays silent, if the silent majority stays. Thank you very much. It's lovely to play these songs. I don't get to play all that much at the moment, obviously. But our huge thanks to Anna and everyone at Refugee Tales for not only keeping on with the remarkable initial work that you and they do, but for managing to support musicians through this time as well. Refugee Tales really is a wonderful thing, and well, it's terrible that it exists, you know, but it's the organisation itself is a wonderful thing, and it really is delightful to be playing for you again this year, albeit in slightly strange circumstances. We'll sing you this. This is a song I wrote last year with the help of and for Refugee Tales. So I suppose this is our little offering a refugee tale. Should I start that again, Ciaran? That wasn't very good, was it? Sorry about that.
It's okay.
one old land to another stricken home, and I'd do anything at all to build with no cares in the world. If nothing shines back at all, then where is any light? Anything but a fall. Scars that tell a tale of all that went before. A journey of such little hope through time and space, and little glory from pillar and to post. Love but mainly loss, and under many roofs with different rules, and fear to start or tell a story from one old land to another stricken home. And I'd do anything at all to build with no cares in the world. If nothing shines back at all, then where is any light? Anything but a fall. With light all gone and dreary, darkness chases minds, and in times past when strength didn't last, you see all that isn't glory. You watch as minds get turned, and as old dreams burn, and when there's nothing left to be made of all, crash and burn in time's old story from one old land to another stricken home. And I'd do anything at all to build with no cares in the world. If nothing shines back at all, then where is any light? Anything but a fall. To fly from hope to pain, take away all claims, and still to hold some love for things, bring gifts of home and new territories. They lock up old works, divisions that will hurt, but it's not enough to break the rules of all we know and all our stories from one old land to another stricken home. And I'd do anything at all to build with no cares in the world. If nothing shines back at all, then where is any light? Anything but a fall. From one old land to another stricken home. And I'd do anything at all to build with no cares in the world. Nothing shines back at all, and where is any light? Anything but a fall. Couple of mistakes in there, just like a proper Greg Russell and Ciaran Algar live performance, I feel. So there we go. We've just got time for one more for you on this little remote set that we are doing. I hope the rest of the events go well. And anything to add at this venture, Ciaran?
Yeah, so I noticed that Greg was there putting his capo on, but as the time he was recording that, he didn't know what we were going to, so I'm going to do something that maybe he wasn't expecting me to do. We'll finish off with a set of tunes, and this set of tunes is called De Gulehus. It's named after a fantastic yellow house in Denmark. Yellow house in Danish is De Gulehus, and that shows how cultured we are, I feel. But yeah, thank you for having us. I'm very sorry that you've had to put up with Greg talking for the whole gig when we all know it would have been much more entertaining if it had been me. But the way this was recorded, I've had to just sit and nod. Even that was funny, but it could have been much better. But yeah, thank you very much. Hope you all have a great day, time, whatever. And yeah, hopefully see you soon in the next few years. Who knows? So yeah, this is the Gulahoos. Thank you very much. Have a lovely evening. Mr. Greg Russell, everybody. I don't know if he'll be able to record this bit, but Ciaran, hey.
Yeah.
Goodbye.
Thank you.
Wow. Thank you, Ciaran. Thank you, Greg. So this is, great for that. Thanks. So this is the second evening event of Refugee Tales 2020. I hope you've all enjoyed it. If you have enjoyed it, you can see more from the website, Refugee Tales, and you can see what's coming up tomorrow. And this includes reading from the Universal Declaration of Human Rights at 9 a.m. before people are set to walk tomorrow, a new tale by Dinah Nairi, a film letter to walkers by Ali Smith and Sarah Wood at 1 p.m. and a contributor with lived experience of detention before our evening event hosted by Ada Miriam with the Hotliers Tale by Robert McFarlane. Lots to look through as we walk in solidarity for a future without immigration detention. I just want to leave you with some words from a poet. I mean, like, this is the thing that I revel in and I live with and for. A poet by the name of Nazim Hikmet, who himself spent the majority of his life in solitary confinement and prisons only for writing poetry which was critical of the government. So that was his only crime, and he spent most of his life in it. And I just want to read a quick excerpt from him. And just to say that this is a man who was in jail. They'd taken everything away from him, so he had no pen, no paper, nothing. And Nazim Hikmet bit off his fingernails and etched poems into the wall. So when the guards opened the solitary confinements and light came in, they could see poems etched into the wall. So this is a man who had to write, and I think that goes back to what Behrouz was talking about you have to create, we have to write, we have to reinvent freedom for ourselves, and how we find that in our language and our art, and how we find that through expression. And this is just the last section of Nazim Hikmet's poem called On Kindness. It's only 9 lines long. He says, "This earth will grow cold, a star among stars, and one of the smallest, a gilded mote on blue velvet. I mean this, our great earth. This earth will grow cold one day, not like a block of ice or a dead cloud even, but like an empty walnut. It will roll along in pitch black space. You must grieve for this right now. You have to feel this sorrow now, for the world must be loved this much if you're going to say, I lived." Thank you, Refugee Tales. Keep living, keep fighting the good fight, and see you tomorrow, or see you soon. I'll see you at some point in the future when hopefully we'll be able to congregate again. Thank you.